Hello everybody, how you doing?
Good.
Well, that intro was intimidating. But I am so humbled and honored, Hope City, for you putting this on and including me in this process. So I'm glad that this night was framed around talking with each other as if we're in our living room, because my living room is my safe space. I find that when I start to share my story, I become very reclusive. So for me, this is a step towards, as much as I hope that people will be vulnerable with me, I'm working on being vulnerable with others. So thank you for sharing this space with me. So as it was said, I'm going to be talking about intergenerational violence. And for me, this is incredibly important because as we begin to organize our communities, much as the woman who is being quoted, Angela Davis, says, is the power of the people is within the people. And so for me, it's incredibly important for us to be able to share the most inner pieces of ourselves before we can ever expect to build community and relationships. So for Black folk like myself, trauma looks different, right? It touches us in different places. When we speak to our story, it's deep-rooted. It draws out emotions that we're not necessarily comfortable with, especially when it comes to the stories of our parents and our grandparents. So, violence impacted me in the womb. My mother's biological parents were both killed. My maternal grandmother, and for those out there that have triggers towards domestic violence, I want to put this out there and give space for y'all to leave the room if necessary. So my maternal grandmother, my biological maternal grandmother, was beaten to death with a hammer by her boyfriend who was abusive. My paternal biological grandfather was shot and killed in the stomach by his girlfriend's father at the time. My family is from Linden. My mother and my adopted grandmother both grew up on 14th and Lexington. And unfortunately, because of the passing of my biological grandparents, my mother was orphaned at 8 years old. She lost both of her grandparents before she turned 8 and became a foster parent, or a foster child, to her uncle. And so what does this look like when we have a child being in a space where they're unable to grieve at such a young age because there's so much confusion about what went wrong? Where is my mother? Where is my father? Where are my grandparents? And so for my mother, this took a huge toll on the way that she processed her emotions. And what this took the form of was a series of unfortunate, unhealthy relationships that led her to further impact herself through this trauma. When she met the man that I thought was my father, she was hopelessly in love. So much so that she said yes to an abortion for his sake. An abortion of the child that she hoped would be the love that she was lacking in her life for all those years. But eventually my mother, after having to go through that procedure, rose up from the ashes and decided that she was going to have a child that could be her own, a child that she could love, a child that she could provide for. And she gave birth to me. But all of the lies and deceit that my would-be father led and fed to my mother caused her to have an abortion after me. And so we think about all of this trauma, this neglect, this hopelessness that a lot of Black women in particular, and I'm speaking because I'm a Black woman, experience in their lives, where they're forced to think about where their next meal is going to come from, where their next love is going to come from, and how they're going to connect the two to be able to provide for a family one day because they never had a family of their own. And so, unfortunately for my mother, that resulted in her marrying a man that was also abusive and was addicted to crack cocaine, which meant that his addiction led him to be a violent man. And unfortunately, that violence was inflicted on my mother. Unfortunately, that violence was inflicted on me. Unfortunately, that violence led to the physical and emotional abuse of my siblings. I'm the oldest of 6. If you guys haven't seen, I'm obsessed with my family. I'm the oldest of 6, and it's become imperative in my work that I create as much possibility as is humanly capable to provide those who are directly affected with violence into a space or on a path where they can self-advocate. Because for my mother, she was always put in a predicament where she had to not only think about where her next meal was coming from, but where the love that she could provide for her family was coming from, because she felt so malnourished due to her lack of love that she had to find it in a man who unfortunately could not reflect that onto his children. So my stepfather was incarcerated in 2008 after a series of burglaries that he committed. And what that resulted in was me having to take the fatherly role in my family. This is something that is not uncommon in a lot of black families, as we know. But for me, it took an early form when I was 16, having to work and provide for my family in a way that most 16-year-olds become very, very enraged by, because you're 16 and you want to just be hanging out with your friends. But for a lot of us in the black and brown community, we know what that looks like, right? It's having to stay home and babysit your 5 siblings at 10 years old. It's having to figure out how you're going to stretch $2 when you only have 1. And unfortunately, what resulted in my stepfather going to prison was this unhealthy imbalance where the roles shifted between my mother and I. And this was something that was not uncommon, because due to her trauma, my mother was hospitalized twice. And so I figured out early on that if I needed to be powerful, I had to step in that power for my siblings. I couldn't be powerful for myself. It was for them. It was that codependent relationship that my mother exhibited was now being seen in me. And so over the years, I started to figure out that I can challenge power within my home. This man who was big and heavy, this man who exuded what I thought was power, became my main goal to challenge day in and day out. And yes, it was physically painful. Yes, it was emotionally painful. But that led me to a place where I can begin to recognize the power within myself, the power within my siblings, the power of the people in organizing. And so not too long ago, somebody asked me, how did I find my power? And I found my power in protecting my mother. I found my power in protecting my siblings from a man who I thought was unstoppable. And so it's the power and self-confidence, it's the power and numbers that lead us to our path to victory. And so I'm here to tell you that as much as we talk about radicalism, as much as we talk about fighting the quote-unquote man, we need to be looking inwardly at ourselves to recognize what we possess to bring the next person through. In organizing, direct service gets a bad rap. Direct service in the sense of providing food for another person, providing transportation for another person, providing counseling to another person. And oftentimes it gets a bad rap because it's seen as a crutch to the system. We talked about institutions. Direct service is seen as a perpetuating wheel of a vehicle that is oppressive and exploitive to all of us in this room. But I challenge this notion in saying that if it weren't for direct service, I would not be here. If it weren't for direct service, Angela Davis would not have been where she is or where she is today. If it weren't for direct service, the civil rights movement would have never existed. And so as we talk about building power individually and for ourselves, I'm here to challenge you all to say, what does it look like if that self-care that everybody's so fixated on became community care?
Wow.
And this is something that we preach about 24/7, but we need to actually move steps into motion so that our next young person behind us, so that this baby and that baby and this baby over here, while they may be portraits, they came from somebody's heart and from somebody's deep-rooted places that we're so nervous about. And so as we begin to build power for ourselves, we need to also provide a meal for our neighbor. We need to also make sure that we're checking in with one another.
Yes.
Even if it's just a, hey, how are you?
Yes.
Or do you want to grab a coffee? Because directly affected people, those who are directly affected by mass incarceration, if we're talking about the criminal justice system, have to be at the forefront. And they're never going to be at the forefront if we're too busy talking about the power that we're building for our own selves. So I leave you with a little bit of hope that I was gestured into. So on Thursday, February 23rd, those of you that are familiar with our mayor, Andrew Ginther, and I hesitate because he does not represent the entire picture or capture the actual experience of Black and brown residents in Columbus, but he's having a State of the City where he'll be talking about all the great things that this city has to offer for Black and brown residents, despite the fact that 23-year-old Henry Green and 13-year-old Tyree King and 36-year-old John Thomas were murdered by Columbus Police Department. And so on the 23rd, folks will be led into a prayer march. Thank you, big shout out to Hope City House of Prayer. We will be gathering at Hope City House of Prayer, and we'll be led into a 1-mile prayer march to the Columbus Police and Training Academy, where the mayor's State of the City is, go figure, to be praying over this space in hopes that Mayor Andrew Ginther will speak and step into his leadership for the city in the way that they need to be speaking for Black and brown residents. And as much as we talk about a sanctuary city, and yes, with my right hand to God, we do need to have safe spaces and brave spaces for our immigrant, refugee, and Muslim residents. However, we can never have a sanctuary city when Black and brown lives are being lost at the hands of police. So what does sanctuary city really mean when we're isolating an entire group of people? And that goes for this whole All Lives Matter conversation. Is this country was built on the backs of Black and brown people, and until we decide to liberate Black and brown people truly from the criminal justice system and from impoverished areas and low-resource communities, we can never say that all lives matter. Thank you.